Well, it's the year 483 BC. In 483 BC, it's been about 3 years since King Ahasuerus has come into power. He was the son of Darius the First, who was Darius the Great, who was the king of Persia. And he reigned from 486 to about 465 BC. So in this particular year, in around 483 BC, he holds a 6-month-long feast in his capital city of Susa. Susa, on your map, is somewhere in this area right here. Now, I'll listen to this 18,000 different ways, and it was pronounced 18,000 different ways. So Ahasuerus, that's as close as I'm going to get it, is now in his capital city, one of the 4 capital cities of Susa. And this particular empire that he is reigning over is a rather large empire. It's about 2 million square miles at this particular time. Now that's a lot of miles. That's a lot of area. It actually is about the distance of about 3,000 miles from east to west. And for those of you who are trying to get a feel for what does that mean, well, from Boston to LA is just under 3,000 miles. So it's a very wide area. Now, it's not nearly as tall as the United States, so therefore it doesn't have as much land mass as the United States, but we're talking about a large area at this particular time for him to be king over, for him to be emperor over. And he is now here in his capital city, 3 years into it, and he has started to squelch and to put down a few of these local rebellions that have gone up against him since he's become king. And now in this 3rd year, he is trying to get his nobles and his high officials together, and he's holding a 6-month-long feast for them in order to drum up support. You see, a number of years earlier, his father had gone into war against the Greeks over in this area here, and he had been defeated at Marathon. Now, you might pay attention to that particular word because, oh yeah, I've heard of a marathon before. Well, that's where the word comes from, because at that particular battle, the Greeks won, and the man who took the information over to tell everybody about it ran 26 miles, gave the report, and died. That's not exactly what you want to do, but that's what happened, right? And so because of that, a marathon was developed from that and the run for that. But anyway, about 490 BC, that's when his father was defeated in the Greece area. So now he wants to go back and he wants to make up for it. But he needs support. And so for 6 months here in the capital city, they have a feast. And when we're talking about a feast, we're talking about something that's lavish, right? They have food galore. They have wine to everybody's liking, to as much as they want. They can just have anything that they want. Now, it's not an everyday thing probably, but ongoing for 6 months. And then at the end of this 6 months, for another week, he has another feast for the people who are in Susa. So this is not just the nobles and high officials, but this is for anyone else. And at the same time, his wife, Vashti, the queen, she also gives a feast for all the women. And so for about 6 months, they're having nothing but a party here in the capital city of Susa. But it's all to drum up support so that he can go and he can fight against the Greeks. So at the end of this 7 days, this last feast, he is starting to feel himself a little bit, as we might say. He's feeling the effects of the wine that he has been drinking. And so he tells his eunuchs, he has 7 specific eunuchs that are serving him all the time. He tells his eunuchs, he gives them the command, he says, go and get my queen, go and get Vashti, and you bring her out before them. I want everyone to see how beautiful that she is. Let everyone look at her to see how beautiful she is. Well, he got an answer he didn't expect. Because for whatever reason, and for whatever manner in which he has asked for this to happen, Vashti is a little bit offended by it. Not a little bit offended by it. She's a lot offended by it, to the point that she is willing to refuse and say, no, I'm not coming. Now, you don't say no to kings at this time, okay? This is not something that's done. But she said, no, I'm not coming. Well, the answer goes back to the king. And you can imagine how upset that he is. He's enraged. He's furious. How could he, the king, the one over this vast empire, and everyone is subject to him, how could he actually make a command to his own wife and she say, no, that ain't happening? So he's furious. But it's interesting, at least it's interesting to me, that he asked the opinion of his counselors on what to do. What are we going to do? What should be done? He actually asked the question in Esther chapter 1 and verse 15. According to the law, what is to be done to Queen Vashti because she has not performed the command of King Ahasuerus, delivered, I knew I'd say it differently, Ahasuerus, either way, delivered by the eunuchs. So he's got this one particular servant, Mumakan. Now he's all upset. He's upset about what's going to happen to the whole kingdom because of this. He says, it's not just against you, O king, that she has wronged, but she has wronged every man in the kingdom. Every man in the kingdom now is going to not be the master of his own house. Because you see, what's going to happen is all the women are going to hear what Queen Vashti has done, and they're all going to say the same thing. No, I'm not going to do what you want me to do. No, forget it. And so our whole culture, our whole kingdom, we're shot. We're over with. We're done. So here's what you need to do, king. You make a decree that she will no longer be able to come before you. Isn't that interesting? She didn't want to come before you. But you make a decree that she can no longer come before you and that she is no longer going to be queen, and that's what we'll do. And the king says, that sounds pretty good. So here's what we'll do. We'll make a law, and the law will tell everybody that the man is the head of the house. Again, it's kind of interesting that they actually have to issue a law for them to say that the man is going to be the head of the house when that's exactly what they were at the time. Just kind of interesting and ironic to think about. So they issue this edict, this decree, and by the way, just so that you remember, any decree, any edict, any law that they issue, you can't go back on it. Once it's done, it's done. So they make this decree. They sent letters to all the royal provinces, to every province in its own script, and to every people in its own language, that every man be master in his own household and speak according to the language of his people. So, he brings together his people, he has this feast, he's trying to drum up support, and he can't even get the support of his wife. And so therefore he says, well, we'll get rid of her and we'll keep going. So now it's been a few years later. Chapter 2 opens up. It says, after these things. Well, these things appear to be that it's happened another 3 or so years later. You're about the year 480. And in this particular time frame, what has happened is the king, and by the way, he's also known as King Xerxes. So I'm going to go with Xerxes from now on because that's easier to say. Xerxes has gone over and he has tried to take over Greece. And he started out with a pretty good record. At the very beginning, he was winning. Now, he took a very large army, and by the way, it's interesting if you go back and look at some of the historical things of what they did in order to get the army over into the mainland and the bridges that they built and all this and that. Yeah, go read about it some. It's pretty interesting. But they were pretty successful at the very beginning, just at the very beginning, though, because after that, his army, well, specifically his navy, was defeated at Salamis. And there was another word, Plataea or something like that. And so he was defeated there. And so because he was being defeated, he decides to go back home, and he leaves the army in charge, or his cousin in charge of his army, and they're defeated in the year 479. And so now he's kind of gone back home. He's gone back home. He didn't accomplish what he wanted to accomplish, and now he gets back to his home, and he probably wants to be consoled and things like that, and he remembers, oh yeah, I don't have a queen. It says he remembered what he had done with Vashti. Well, obviously his servants look around and go, well, we can't have the king acting this way. The king is looking for a wife, he's looking for a queen, and so we need to find something. So here's the idea, king. We're going to go out into all of your kingdom, into your empire, and we're going to find all the beautiful women, the beautiful young women, and we're going to bring them before you. We're going to put them as part of your harem, and then you get to select out of all of these women who is going to be your new queen. Now, as we read this and as we study this, we need to understand something. We need to understand that this is not some beauty contest where the people who come before him, he selects from them and the rest of them go home. That's not what this is. This is not The Bachelorette or whatever it is. I don't watch any of them, obviously. But this is none of that stuff. No, it's nothing like that. What this is they go out and they find the prettiest young ladies out in the empire, and they grasp them from their families, and they no longer go back. They never go back. Not only do they never go back, they're taking them, and basically they are either going to become the queen, which, by the way, only one becomes that, or the rest of them will become concubines, which is a second-hand wife. No rights, no privileges. Their children have no privileges. The only thing that really they get from all of this is that they get shelter and they get their food. That's pretty much all they get out of it. So we shouldn't make this into a Cinderella story where they brought them all in and tried on the glass slipper. Oh, well, you're the only one that has to stay. The rest of you can go home. Live your life happily ever. It doesn't work that way. That's not what this is. This is stealing the young women away from their homes. So we need to make sure we understand that when we read through it, because sometimes it's easy to overlook that fact. This is not the best situation for these young ladies. This is not the best situation for the young lady we're fixing to talk about. This is not a good life at all. But they go out and they grab all the young women. Now, we're introduced now to another character. His name is Mordecai. Mordecai, and that is his Babylonian name, a Babylonian name that would be named after the Babylon god Marduk, or Marduk. If you recall, when the Jews were taken into captivity, often they were given Babylonian names. Daniel wasn't known as Daniel, right? He was known as Belteshazzar. Right? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, well, that was their Babylonian names. That was not their Hebrew names. Well, Mordecai is his Babylonian name. Now, we don't know his Hebrew name, but he was Mordecai. This Mordecai was a Jew whose family, it's interesting, was from the tribe of Benjamin. As a matter of fact, it wasn't just the tribe of Benjamin. He was from the family of Kish. Now, if you remember the family of Kish, that is where King Saul was from. Remember King Saul, the very first king over the United Kingdom of Israel? Family of Kish. Not only that, but his family was taken captive in the second captivity taken from Nebuchadnezzar around the year 597 when King Jehoiakim was taken captive. So this is who this Mordecai was. He was a Jew. He was also seemingly an official, some type of government official, some type of governmental authority and responsibilities. And we'll see that as we go through because of where he is and what he's often doing. And so this is this Mordecai. And what he has done is he has, from a very early age, not him, but the young lady, raised up Hadassah. I don't know how to say her name in that way. That is her Hebrew name, which, by the way, means myrtle, like the myrtle tree, myrtle flower. I just remembered that, so I thought I'd tell you. It means nothing, but I thought I'd give it to you. Her other name that she goes by that we all know is Esther. And Esther, again, is a Babylonian type name that was given after the god Ishtar, which means star. But from a very early age, he had raised her because her parents were dead. She had no father, no mother. And he was kinfolk. He was a cousin. So he had raised her as his own daughter since she was very young. Well, it tells us here in the scriptures that Esther was a young woman who had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. Well, that's important to the story because what has the king done? He sent out an edict saying, we're going to gather up all the young ladies who are beautiful and we're going to bring them in and I'm going to select my new queen from them. And so she was selected. She was taken. Now, I want you to, again, think about her life. I want you to think about what's happened to her so far in her own life. She has grown up without father or mother, without her real father and mother. They had died. Luckily for her, she has kinfolk who has taken her and has raised her up as his own daughter. But it wasn't her real father. She would have known that. And now she is taken from that house, and now she's going to go, and she's never going to get to return. And she's either going to become queen, which, you got to look at it and say, what are my odds? Can't be real good. I'm going to be a concubine in the king's palace. There's not a lot to look forward to there, is it? What would you be doing if you were in that position? Would you not be questioning what's going on? Why is this happening to me? She was taken, and she was put in custody of Haggai, who was the eunuch in charge of these young virgins. And it's interesting, again, in Esther chapter 2 and in verse 9, and the young woman pleased him and won his favor. Does it not remind you, when you read something like that, of another young person who was put in a bad situation? Maybe going back to Genesis chapter 39, 40, 41, a guy by the name of Joseph, who was sold into slavery by his brothers, but even sold into slavery that he found favor in the eyes of all the people around him, including when he was thrown into jail. Everywhere it goes, if you're going down through this chapter, you'll see it mentioned 3 times that she won favor in the sight of the people who were around her. What she was doing was she was making the best of the situation and circumstances she was given. As you go through, make application to some of these things. She was making the best of the situation and circumstances that she was dealt. She could have just jumped, this is not fair. This is not what I wanted. But she made the best of what she had. There used to be an old song. It's amazing what you remember. An old song when I was growing up, making the best of a bad situation. Some of you may remember that song. Most of you probably don't, because I'm getting a bunch of blank stares. But anyway, there was a song, okay? Making the best of a bad situation. Well, that's what she's trying to do. So she is now, as part of all of this, she is now part of the beautifying process. Now, the beautifying process in the Persian Empire, there was for 12 months. They would be given their different ointments and their different perfumes and this and that and the other. And so for 12 months, 12 months, a year, they would go through this. And then at the end of this year, they would be given one night where they would go to the king. And we won't go through any more details other than that, than to say that after that one night, if the king was pleased with her, she might have an opportunity. If not, she would go to this other eunuch. I'm not even going to attempt to say his name. It starts with an S. And they would be part of the concubines. Now, along this way, throughout this 12 months, Esther does not tell anyone that she is a Jew. Why? Why would she not tell anyone? Well, the answer is simple. Mordecai told her not to. And she was submissive to Mordecai. She was respectful of Mordecai. She honored Mordecai. And so when he told her don't do that, she didn't do it. Mordecai obviously had his reasons. It doesn't specify what it is, but he told her not to tell. And so she doesn't tell what nationality that she's from, that she's a Jew. So at the end of the 12 months, it's Esther's time. And she only takes in with her, she gets a request to take in anything she wants. She asked Haggai, the king's eunuch, what to take in. And so she takes whatever he gives her. And it tells us in Esther chapter 2 and in verse 17, the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen. So now consider for a moment. Her physical lot in life has changed, hasn't it? She went from being really what you might think of as an orphan without father or mother to a people who were in captivity, to now she is queen over the whole empire. Well, that's a pretty drastic turnaround, isn't it? It's pretty big change. So now she is queen. And by the way, after he makes her queen, instead of Vashti, the king holds a feast. This king likes to feast. So he holds another feast, and he calls it Esther's feast. And in Esther's feast, he also relieves people of their taxes and gives gifts with royal generosity. He just has a big feast for her. Now, it also tells us at this time that Mordecai is doing his normal business. Mordecai is at the king's gate. So again, we see that there's something associated with being a government authority of some type. And while he's there, he comes across this information. This information is that 2 of the king's servants, the ones who guard his what does it call it, his threshold, these two guys being Bigthan and Teresh, something like that, they're plotting against him. They want to assassinate the king. And so Mordecai learns of this. And what Mordecai does is he goes and he tells Esther, and Esther tells the king on behalf of Mordecai. And the king, Xerxes, he goes out and he has an investigation on it. And the investigation finds out that these two guys were plotting an assassination. Not only were they plotting it, they wanted to do it, and so they were therefore hung on the gallows. And we could talk about that for a few minutes, but we're not. They're killed. They're executed because of it. So now Mordecai has done something on behalf of the king, and it's written in the chronicles of the king. It's written in their history books for them, but nothing is done for Mordecai. As a matter of fact, as we open up chapter 3, we come across a different guy. This different guy is by the name of Haman. Haman, it says, the Agagite. Now, why it describes him as the Agagite is an interesting thing to study. One possibility is that he was a descendant of the king of the Amalekites. You remember the king of the Amalekites? His name was Agag. You remember what happened to the Amalekites? You remember that they were destroyed because of the actions that they did, but they were destroyed by who? Oh, it was King Saul. That's who it was, wasn't it? You remember who was also from the family of Saul? Mordecai? That's a possibility, isn't it? That maybe it's called an Agagite because he was a descendant of that particular king or somewhere associated with that particular king. It's also, by the way, a possibility that they use that term as just meaning someone who is an enemy of the Jews. That's also a possibility because it says that associated with his name multiple times throughout the book. Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And so it may just be a way of referencing someone who is an enemy of the Jews. But this Haman has been promoted multiple times to the point that he is over all the other officials in the land. All the other officials, according to the king's edict, are supposed to honor him, even to the point that they would bow down to him. Now, bowing down doesn't necessarily mean worship, it just means giving honor. If you look back in the book of Genesis chapter 23 and verse 7, Abraham bows down before the Hittites. Well, he wasn't worshiping them, he was just giving them honor. Jacob's sons bow down before him. Well, they weren't worshiping him, they were giving him honor. So the idea of bowing down before someone does not equate to worship, but would include honor for sure. So that all the other officials were supposed to bow down, but you know who didn't? Mordecai. Mordecai refused to bow down. To the point that all the other servants realized it. All the other officials realized that he didn't do that. And so they started asking him. Now, it doesn't appear that Haman noticed it right away, but they started asking, why are you going against the king's orders? Why are you going against his edict? And they finally said, well, we'll see how much he holds on to this. We'll tell Haman. And so they do. And Haman then begins to notice, you know, he doesn't. Everybody else does, but he doesn't bow down before me. And you know what it makes him? Mad. Really mad. And we start to see his character. Because he's so mad that he doesn't want to just punish Mordecai. But he finds out that Mordecai is a Jew, and he says, I want to get rid of the whole group. I want to annihilate all of them. And so he starts to put together his plan. He says, I'm going to get rid of all of them. So what he does is he casts pur. I'll get it right in a minute, pur. Now that just means casting lots. It means what they determine, saying this is the way we're going to do it, and whatever the answer comes out, it was meant by the gods to be that way. And so he says, when am I going to do it? Well, let's start casting lots. Is it going to be this month or this month, this month or this month? And the month that it comes out is the 12th month, which, by the way, they're in the first month. So it's 12 months away, about a year away. The furthest time away that it could be is what it turns out to be. And on the 13th day of the month. And what he decides then is he's going to go to the king. And he goes to the king and he basically misleads the king. Because he tells Xerxes in in Esther chapter 3 and verse 8, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's law, so that it is not to the king's profit to tolerate them. If it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, that they may put it into the king's treasuries. He goes to the king and he says, King, man, there is a bad group of people in here. In your whole kingdom, they do not like you. They do not like your laws. They're rebellious. We need to get rid of them. And I am looking out for your best interest to the fact that I will actually pay you so that we can get rid of them. 10,000 talents. By the way, I looked that up. 375 tons of silver. That's a lot. That's past my ability to think about how much that is. The king, seemingly to me at least, in the way that I read it, and I realize that everybody reads things differently, in the way he just kind of flipping them. Okay. I mean, can you imagine just like that, just saying, yeah, get rid of them? We're talking about people. He gives him his signet ring, which basically says, here you have the authority to go and do whatever you want to. He gives his signet ring to him and says, do as you wish with these people. Keep your money. And so Haman calls together the scribes, and they write letters to instruct all the peoples inside the empire, inside the kingdom, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate the Jews. To destroy, to kill, and to annihilate them, and to take their plunder. In the 12th month, on the 13th day. And they send it out to everywhere around the empire. And it's read, and it throws confusion everywhere, including in the city of Susa, where they are. But it says at the end of chapter 3, and the king and Haman sat down to drink. But the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. You want to know what kind of people they were? They just put out an edict to kill thousands and thousands of people, and they sit down to drink. Gives you an indication of what they thought, what they didn't think. So as chapter 4 opens up, by the way, we're not going to make it through the whole story if you hadn't figured it out yet, because got 5 minutes and we're nowhere close. As chapter 4 opens up, though, we have Mordecai, the queen's uncle or cousin, and he is there in the city. He has read the decree, and he is obviously devastated to the point that he goes out. He shows himself to be in great distress, and he is crying out outside the king's gates, because you can't go inside the king's gates and do this. And he's crying out, bemoaning the fact that his people are going to be killed in 11 months. Esther hears about this, but has no idea what's going on. And so she sends clothes out to her uncle. I'll cheer him up. I'll send him some new clothes. Put on these new clothes, uncle. Get up. Take off those rags that you've ripped on yourself to show. Get up and everything will be okay. Mordecai refuses him. So she sends out her servant, trusted servant, to see her uncle. And Mordecai says this. He says, you go back and you tell her. You tell her what's going to happen. You tell her that the king has issued an edict that every one of the Jews will be destroyed. Here's a copy, he says. Here's a copy of what has been sent out. You take it to her and you show it to her, and you tell her to go in to the king and plead for her people. You see, up until this point, she has continued to keep her people quiet. They don't know who her people are. But you go in and you plead before the king. Now, this is in Esther's 5th year or so of her reign. Of her, I don't know if I can call it reign, but anyway, she's in her 5th year as being queen. She sends it back and says, Uncle, you know what the law is. The law is that if anyone goes into the king's inner court without being invited, oh, and by the way, he hasn't asked for my presence in 30 days. I don't know if that's a saying. I don't know what I did to him, but he hasn't called for me in 30 days. She doesn't think that he's really overly thrilled with her at the moment. But if you go in to the king's inner court without being invited, it's death. That's it. It's no, I don't want to see you today, get out of here. It's death. Now, if the king wants to see you and he stretches out his scepter, then you can come and touch the end of his scepter, then he's providing mercy to you. But otherwise, this ain't good. So she sends that message back out to Mordecai. Mordecai receives the message. And here in verse 12 of Esther chapter 4, the passage that was read for you this morning, and they told Mordecai what Esther had said. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. This is a beautiful 3 verses here. Look at what Mordecai says. First of all, he says, you're not going to escape. Just because you're in the palace, you can't escape this edict. You can't escape this law. You're going to perish just like the rest of us. So don't think where you are that you've got to pass. Then he goes on to say, by the way, deliverance will come. One of the interesting points about the book of Esther that you all know is that God's name is never mentioned in the book. And yet over and over again, in many different places, the Jews' faith in God appear. And this is one of those cases. He says that deliverance will come. Now, again, it's easy for us to not remember what this edict is. It says every Jew in the kingdom. That includes those that are in Jerusalem. That includes those that are in Judea. All Jews are to be annihilated. Well, what was God's promise? God's promise is that the seed would come through Abraham's seed, through Isaac, through Jacob, through the Israelites. It hasn't come yet. The Messiah hasn't come yet. So he says they're going to get deliverance, even if it's not from you. Deliverance will rise. But then he says, for if you remain silent at this time, if you don't do anything, relief will come for the Jews. It will arise from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows? And who knows? If perhaps you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. I wrote in my own notes, I said it's one of the most beautiful and thought-provoking questions of the Old Testament. How often we should consider if the events in our lives have led to this very opportunity of ours to do good. When you get to a certain age, which is typically past the point of when you don't think about nothing. So if you get to even into maybe your late 20s, hopefully you start thinking about things. Early 20s, you're still, But you get to this point and you start thinking, you look back and see what happened in your life already. You start thinking, I wonder why that happened. I wonder why this happened. And then the more you look at it, the more you think, maybe God was helping me along the way, finding me a place to do good. And who knows if perhaps you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. I encourage all of us each day to think about where we are, what opportunities that we have, and then to basically say, who knows? Maybe that's exactly why God put me here. To take advantage of this particular opportunity to do good. Well, I want to give you Esther's response, and then we're going to be done for the day. Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do." By the way, again, it doesn't say that she prayed to God. It doesn't mention God's name, but they're fasting for 3 days. What is the implication? "Then," she says, "I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." She has resolved herself to do whatever she can for her people. And if she perishes, she's accepted that fact. We were going to go through a lot more, but we didn't have time. And we may pick it up later. It's a beautiful story. And there's so much in it that you think, well, that's just a story about some people in the Old Testament, and it's a good bedtime story thing you can read. Now, there's a lot of things in it that we can learn from. A lot of things, and I've got some lessons that we'll get to, hopefully. A lot of things that we can apply in our own lives. And so as you read these, I obviously chose this one because this was part of our Bible reading this week. So I'm hoping this was just a reminder of some of the things that you've already been reading. But I want you to make sure that you open up your minds to the stories in the Old Testament and realize they're people. And these events are happening to them, just like everyday life happens to us. It just does. But we should realize that God is working. God is working. The one statement, and I put it in our memo, handout, bulletin, whatever you want to call it, that I really appreciated someone writing on this. He said that God is there even when you don't see Him. And when it comes to the book of Esther, God's name is never written, but God is there. We need to make sure that in our own lives we realize that God is always there. If you're here this morning, you've never obeyed the gospel of Jesus Christ, you need to do so. He's prepared all things. All things are ready. He has done everything so that we can have a relationship with Him, that we can be part of His family, that we can come before His presence. But we must obey Him in order to do that. We must become part of His family. You must repent, you must confess, you must believe first. Repent and confess and be baptized into His family. And then that's the start of your relationship, not the end. That's the start. And you continue to serve Him. Maybe you've done that and there's something in your life that's not right and you need help with the brethren here.